Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's my great honor to join with our good friend, Amir Tibon. Amir is, as I think we all know, an award-winning Israeli journalist, diplomatic correspondent for Haaretz, a survivor of the October 7th massacre at Kibbutz Nahal Oz. He's the author of The Gates of Gaza, which was the winner of the National Jewish Book Award, the Bernstein Prize, and more recently, the 2026 Wingate Prize. He has previously served as Haaretz Washington, D.C. correspondent 2017 to 2020, covering the Trump administration. Welcome, Amir.
Hi, so good to see you, my friend.
It's great to see you. I've been thinking, we've been having these conversations for a long time. So when we started, you were sitting right outside of Gaza, in the Gaza envelope, and we would always kind of comment that it always looked like Gan Eden there. And then, of course, you went through October 7th and the dramatic story of your father and all the rest, and how you and your family survived. And it's a remarkable story. But then you moved north because it was safer in the north. And now you're getting ready to move south, and it feels like it's safer in the south presently than it is in the north. So help us just before we get to the questions, tell us about your family, how you guys are doing with all of this, and tell us the inside baseball piece of Amir Tibon and his family.
So, yeah, a lot of things have happened since our last update. It's been a few months, but here in Israel, often months feel like years. That's at least the recent sense of things. So, yeah, we are in Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, near Haifa, which basically adopted Nahal Oz after October 7. Came here together as a community on October 8. And over time, a lot of people left. Many went back to Nahal Oz. Today, around 60% of the community, maybe even 60 something, is back in Nahal Oz. I think when we spoke last, that number was maybe, 40%. So you see that it continues to rise. And here in Mishmar Emek, it's just mostly families with younger kids who are here finishing the school year. And that includes us. And then, summertime, that's when we are planning to move back, and other families as well. Not everyone, I think, will move back. It's a very personal choice, very family decision for each one. And Nahal Oz, interesting to note, hosted families from kibbutzim in the north and cities in the north of Israel during the last round of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah and all of that. I mean, our home in Nahal Oz, was available because we are here. So we hosted a family from Nahariya, which is one of the biggest cities that was under fire from Hezbollah. And then a family from Kibbutz Kabri, which is close to the Lebanese border. And even a family from Tel Aviv that wanted to escape the Iranian missiles at Tel Aviv for a few days and suddenly, went to the Gaza border region. So look how the tables have turned. Crazy, I know. I will say though that, when we look at the situation in Lebanon, from our perspective as Gaza border residents, future residents, it is very concerning. Because our communities, Nahal Oz, and all the other kibbutzim in the region that are just beginning to get back on their feet and families are coming back, we cannot afford what happened to the communities in the north. They had come back after the previous round with Hezbollah in 2024 ended, and they were promised long-term quiet and security. And a year and a half later, they found themselves under rocket fire. And the biggest fear factor over there are these drones that are operated with, fiber optics. Fiber optics. It's a huge concern. And the Gaza border communities are even more traumatized than the border communities of the north because of October 7, and we cannot allow that kind of thing to happen. So there is a big responsibility here for the military. You know, Michael, my level of expectations of the government is very low, unfortunately, but I do have some expectations of our military to do everything to avoid that kind of situation for the communities of Nahal Oz and Be'eri and Nir Am and all of these places that are getting back on their feet. And so we also have a watchful eye on the north in that regard.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how delighted one of the Iranian leaders would be in hearing this conversation.
Well, they have their own problems, you know.
We're going to come to it, but I think that this war of attrition, right? And if that's if that's their goal, then there is a certain success factor. So let's get into it, and let's deal with the most present news story. Within the last 24 hours, Axios reported that President Trump called Prime Minister Netanyahu effing crazy, furious that Israeli operations against Hezbollah were risking derailing ongoing diplomacy with Iran and undermining efforts to preserve a fragile regional ceasefire. So from the way you see it, from your reporting, is this a real rupture? Is it a genuine break? Or is this theatrical pressure?
First of all, I trust the report by my friend Barak Ravid. He's an excellent reporter and has great access to this administration. And so I think this is coming, from the top levels possible within the White House. And I think it's coming out for a reason. I think there is real fatigue and real, I think just a loss of patience, you can say, with the Prime Minister Netanyahu inside the Trump administration. They went very far with him and sometimes for him, including what I consider a very inappropriate attempt to apply pressure on Israel's president and on the Israeli prosecution to drop the Netanyahu ongoing corruption trial. But at the same time, they also have their red lines and their limits, and they've been very supportive of Israel and of the prime minister, but I think there is also a degree where they will say, okay, enough. So I trust the story. You can talk about this or that detail, but I understand that the frustration is real. I also think, and this maybe connects to your earlier comment about the Iranians, the war with Iran caused immense damage to the Iranians, and the Iranian population suffered terribly, and their economy has been hit very hard. And the Iranian regime, I think there is still a risk to their long-term stability. But it is true that they survived. And in a way, survival was the most important thing for the regime in this war. They just had Israel and the United States, jointly attack them. And if they manage to withstand that, and there is now some kind of fractures between Israel and the United States, they've had their day. With all of the terrible things that happened to them, with all of the risks that they are still facing. And we can only hope and pray that eventually this evil regime will collapse upon itself. It will be good for Israel, good for America, good for the world, but first and foremost, good for the people of Iran. Be'ezrat Hashem, inshallah, it will happen. But for now, their survival, on the one hand, and their ability to become the subject of tension and disagreement between Israel and the United States, that's the best they can hope for.
Okay, then this really then helps lead to a question about Hezbollah, because the Prime Minister issued a joint statement with Defense Minister Katz threatening to bomb Hezbollah targets in Beirut, the Dahia district, while Iran warned that Israel's actions in Lebanon violated the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. So is the prime minister genuinely pursuing security objectives, as you were just talking about? Or is he managing his far-right coalition at the expense of American diplomacy and doing basically politicking, getting ready for the upcoming election? What do you think? Or is it all of the above?
It can be all, it can be none, but I'll tell you one thing I learned when I was a child and I watched on a Saturday morning a Western film with my father on one of the rare Saturdays he was home in Lebanon, actually, at the time. When I was growing up, he was in Lebanon all the time. And in that Western movie we watched together on Saturday morning, there was a very important sentence. If you want to shoot, shoot, don't talk. Okay? If you want to bomb Hezbollah targets deep in Lebanon and in their stronghold in the Dahya in Beirut, you don't put out a statement that you have authorized the IDF to do it. Right? That's not how Israel works. Right? And we did not inform them that we are going to do the beeper operation back in September 2024. Right? That's not how these things work. And so that statement was a very strange statement to put out. In my opinion, much more political in nature than military or national security oriented. And in the end, it led to this intervention by Trump. Now, some people will, who have a more conspiratorial read of things will say, oh, Netanyahu was being under pressure from the far right. He didn't want to get entangled in, further and further into Lebanon. So he put up this statement, and that caused this, butterfly effect of Trump eventually giving him the red light. Well, maybe, but, sometimes when you think something is some kind of a genius flick-flack move, it's actually just unsmart behavior under pressure that leads to bad results.
Right, so sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right?
Indeed,
so,
indeed,
right,
indeed.
Right. Well, then let's turn our attention a little bit more to Israel and Iran. They fought a 12-day war. Trump declared Tehran's nuclear capabilities were completely and fully obliterated by U.S. strikes.
Yes.
But now Israel says Iran is rebuilding its ballistic missile stockpile. Help us understand what you believe to be the honest Israeli security assessment of where Iran actually stands. And is another war not only a possibility, but a probability?
First of all, the 12 days war in June 2025, exactly a year ago, was an important and impressive success, but it was not as successful as sold to the Israeli and American publics by Trump and Netanyahu. And this is it's a problem of credibility, really. Because you can come out and tell your public, we had a very successful operation in Iran. We significantly weakened the Iranian regime. We dialed back their capabilities on both the nuclear and ballistic threat. But the work isn't over yet. And we have to remain, concerned and on guard, and there may be reasons to fight them again in the future. Maybe politically, that is not the most helpful statement for someone who is trying to raise his disappointing numbers in public polling. But if it's the truth, eventually, I think it's better to share it with the public. What we saw instead was a grossly exaggerated version of what had happened. I don't think that the 12 days war, that it was a waste of time or that it was all for nothing or that nothing was achieved. But I also don't think that Iran's capabilities were obliterated. And I don't think that Israel had removed the existential threat, which is what Netanyahu said. And how do I know that this is not the case? Well, I suspected already in real time because I don't really trust Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements. But, half a year later, we were once again at war with Iran. And we are now talking again about the Iranians rebuilding the nuclear capabilities, rebuilding the missile stockpile. They are still getting drones and equipment from China and Russia. And again, that doesn't mean the second Iran wars, you can call it, epic fury, it's how it's called in the American media. I don't think it was a waste of time or all for nothing. And again, I don't want to exaggerate in the other direction either. But these are very complicated issues. And the Iranian regime may be weak, but it is very determined to survive. And it's a bit like a wounded animal, right? Sometimes a wounded animal is the most dangerous animal because it's got very little left to lose. So I think, sadly, this is a more realistic reflection of the situation. We have injured them, but we have not finished them. And this is true for the regime's survival, but also for its nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities. And they will do everything that they can over time in order to rebuild those capabilities, especially if they see it as some kind of a deterrence toward both Israel and the United States. That is just the sad reality we have to contend with. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything about it. I think there are many more things that can be done. But we have to look reality in the eye and understand where we stand.
The view of this war in America is very different than it is in Israel.
Indeed.
And this idea of American Jewry being a fifth column in America is becoming more and more pronounced. And that Axios story yesterday just sort of puts a fine point on it. That,
yes.
And so that's very real. And I think there is a concern in there that is expressed fairly regularly that Iran can come out of this stronger in some ways than it was before. They may have greater control of the Strait of Hormuz and be able to control it in ways that they couldn't before. They may be seen as a stronger force because they survived and they stood up to Trump. Is that a concern of yours? I mean, how are you seeing this negotiation? How nervous are you about it? How confident are you in it? Where are you in this?
So first of all, I think that part of the story here is that there are big societal differences today between Israel and the United States. And those differences are born out of the two very different traumas that our societies had experienced in recent decades, let's put it that. The American trauma is that the United States has been scarred by the long, bleeding, and let's say undecisive wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. And when the American public hears about a new military adventure in Iran, it imagines another Iraq-like scenario. And immediately, a lot of people are trying to push the brakes on this. For Israelis, the defining trauma, of course, right now is October 7. And Israelis are much more likely at this point in the country's history to support the idea of a preemptive war, to support the idea that we have to take action and we cannot sit and wait for the enemy to decide what to do. Because that's really what we did before October 7, and look where it brought us. Of course, there's another way to look at this, which is that what we really need to do is to make peace and to try to create a better situation in the region through diplomacy with whoever we can, maybe not with the Iranian regime, but perhaps, with Saudi Arabia and with other Arab countries, and maybe even with the more moderate elements within the Palestinian society. That's a different debate, and we can have that discussion if you wish as well. But there is right now high levels of support for the idea of a preemptive strike, a preemptive war here in Israel. In America, that is unacceptable. And actually, there is a very strong view that war is only the last resort, and the idea, of a war of choice is extremely unpopular. And so those are just two huge differences in how our societies view the world today. On top of that, I do agree that in Israel, it took more time for people to realize the severity of an unsuccessful war against Iran. And what that would actually mean. I think everybody was a bit, in overdose in the first day or two of the war, with the killing of Khamenei and all their leaders and all of that stuff. But over time, and this is an issue with wars, often you know how you start it, but you don't really know what happens next. And that's what happened here. It turned out to be much more complicated than we had imagined. And the promise that apparently Netanyahu also gave to Trump of a swift, decisive collapse of the Iranian regime did not materialize. And now comes the risk of the regime surviving the war, very weakened, with less capabilities, still, with a watchful eye on its own back, that the Iranian people may rise up because of the terrible situation, but at the same time emboldened, like you said, by its very ability to survive and keep some of its capabilities and build on those for the next round. And that is a big danger, I agree.
One way to understand what you're saying is the advent of the use of the ceasefire, right? So that the United States appears to be always looking for an opportunity for a ceasefire. Indeed. Where wars have not actually been conducted that way. You finish the war, or as Israelis like to say, you negotiate while you're fighting. You don't. Yes. And so that's a very interesting, and you finish your enemy off when you think that your enemy is an existential threat to you, right? If you're not sure, or you're looking at the larger architecture of the Middle East and thinking about China, maybe not. And I think that that's a huge difference between the two countries. This kind of readiness to go to a ceasefire while Israelis are sort of ripping their hair out, thinking, "What are you doing? Let's finish this." So it's a strange moment.
But Israel also is in a problematic position regarding the United States, because the sad reality is we are very isolated on the world stage today. And we've reached a point where, basically, apart from President Trump, we don't really have any support out there.
No.
So we can't even stand up to him if we think he's doing the wrong thing. And he made that clear in that conversation with Netanyahu yesterday that we discussed in the beginning of our session, where he basically told him, what the hell are you doing? And I'm the one saving you out there, and except for me, everybody hates you. And those are terrible words, but one of the issues with Trump is sometimes he will say awful things that could have been said in a better way, but there is some, grain of truth in them. Israel is very isolated today. And that makes us actually weaker also in terms of our relationship with the United States. We don't have any alternative, and that limits our possibilities. And that's why it is so important for Israel to ask itself, what are we doing as a country to repair some of these relationships that have gone sour in recent years? What can be done to create again some levels of support for Israel? First of all, within the American public, there has been a very, very worrying collapse, but also in Europe, also in other important countries out there. This is an important issue. We don't want to reach a situation where everything depends on one country, one party, or one person. We want to have more options out there.
But the reality is that, yes, Israel is isolated, but I'm just speaking as one American Jewish leader. Israel makes our lives as supporters of Israel more difficult by the day.
Yes.
And I'm thinking here, and this is not Michael Siegel talking, every Jewish leader that I talk to, I was part of a, I just came this morning, I was part of a, interestingly enough, a Jewish evangelical conference.
Really? Where did that take place?
It took place in Chicago. This has been going on for about 18 years. And these are not the evangelicals that are cartoon characters that we like, the cartoonish ones, the memes. These are very serious people. They're scholars, and there are serious conversations going on.
You know, I agree with you, but sometimes in the Jewish community, there is not enough appreciation of the evangelical community. And there is a tendency to look at it in stereotypical ways. And I'm very happy that you're mentioning this issue. Because, you know, being an Israeli reporter, I wrote a lot about the evangelicals over the years. It's a fascinating and diverse community that, you know, overwhelmingly supportive of Israel, but in different ways, on different levels, with different emphases. It's not just like one kind of thing. So I'm very happy you say that.
And what's fascinating, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but one of the things that I learned was that the center of gravity for the world evangelical community is moving out of North America.
To South America.
South America has gotten huge,
yes.
And Africa.
Yes.
They believe that in the next 30 years, Africa is going to go from South America to Africa. So you're looking at this worldwide movement, and we're not doing enough to be allies with them. And that's a challenge that I'm happy to talk about another time. But, you know, in this conversation, you mentioned the word West Bank, you mentioned Ben Gvir or Smotrich, and their eyes are rolling, right? They're no longer going to say whatever Israel does is right, and that's a sea change, right?
It is, and we
a very different conversation in there. I've been doing this for 18 years, and it's a very different world that we're dealing with.
You know, I remember that I wrote a story in 2017, so that would be 9 years ago, about the polling at the time that showed a gap between younger and older evangelicals regarding Israel. And it was one of the first polls to actually show this result, that the younger the respondents, less supportive they would be of Israel, even in the evangelical community. And as the years pass by, these younger people are becoming more influential within the movement, within the ministry, within the communities.
Absolutely.
And you're starting to see the results of that.
Absolutely.
And this is it's not going to get any better if we don't take it seriously. And in taking it seriously, in my opinion, it has, you know, it's on 3 levels. Number one is messaging, you know, obviously, and have better messaging and better messengers. Number 2 is policy. You cannot avoid it. Israel does not have to decide its policy priorities only based on world public opinion, because that would be suicidal. But you still have to take it into consideration to a certain degree. And even David Ben-Gurion did that. I mean, there is this kind of attitude of, oh, Israel should just do whatever it wants and discount the opinions of the world. Where if we had acted that way, there would not be a state of Israel today. I mean, Ben-Gurion always played this game of, you know, pushing the boundaries to some degree, but never too far. Because world public opinion and American public opinion and American Jewish public opinion and American Christian public opinion, it all matters for the state of Israel. So it's also policy. And the last thing I want to say, the third thing, I think it's also very, very important just to listen. You know, we like to talk all the time, and if we have better messaging and if we explain to them, and all of that it's great, but also to listen to these people, to our friends, our allies, to the American Jewish community, to the evangelical community, to the people who love Israel, but have something to tell us about what's going on right now. And we should just stop and listen for a moment.
Right. And the stereotypes that we have of the evangelicals is that every evangelical is in love with President Trump. And that is not the case. That is not the case. So it's just the more, and it goes to your point, the more you get to know and you can have a real conversation and there's
Yeah.
real trust. I spend a
Yeah.
lot of time in different evangelical communities. That doesn't mean I'm not concerned about the politics. It means that you have to have, you go and you have a conversation with people who you can actually have a conversation with. And I think, as you said, I think it is important, but I want to mention and kind of come back to our conversation by mentioning that you are planning to move with your family in the not too distant future back to Nachal Oz.
A few weeks, basically.
A few weeks. You're going to be moving over the
weeks.
summer back into your home back in Gaza, or the Gaza envelope. And you obviously have a vested interest in what's going on in Gaza and how things are moving or not moving, where Hamas is in this point in time. So you're making this choice to move. What are you seeing there, and how do you understand this moment?
So first of all, I'll say a few words about Nachal Oz, and then talk about Gaza. And obviously, the two things are connected. So in Nachal Oz, there is a sense of constant growth and repair, and a positive trajectory. Like I said in the beginning, last time we spoke, about 40% of the population went back to the kibbutz. By now, it's just over 60. This Friday, we are heading down there to spend the weekend in our house, and there is like a little festival reopening the pool of the kibbutz for the summer season. And there's going to be like a big event, great things. And I was there just a few days ago. I'm teaching a course right now in a regional council, which is Ramat HaNegev, like the mountain of the Negev. It's a bit south of Nachal Oz and more inside Israel, south of Beersheba. It's the largest regional council in Israel in terms of geography, and the smallest one in terms of population. And I'm teaching a course there every 2 weeks. There's a meeting about basically Zionist history, you can call it, but like reading important texts of the Zionist movement. It's really fun. So when I teach there, I stay to sleep the night in Nachal Oz. Most nights, it's quiet right now. You don't have big explosions. You don't hear a lot of gunfire. So things are looking better in that regard. But we also have a problem. And that problem is the lack of implementation of President Trump's plan for Gaza. And, Michael, over the years, we've talked through the Obama and Trump and Biden and second Trump presidencies. I have my opinions, you have your opinions, but when an American president makes a sincere effort to make things better here in the region, I don't care if it's Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump too. I judge on the merits, not on the personality, not on the party, not on anything else. I think his plan for Gaza is a good plan, and I think he's failing in implementing it. It's like he's lost interest, basically. He put out this plan. He gave Jared Kushner the keys. They did this ceremony. They announced this board of peace. They said they were going to raise billions from the Arab countries. And then they started the war with Iran, and nothing is happening. And that's very dangerous, because if this Trump plan falls apart and is not implemented in the coming weeks, war will replace it. In the Middle East, there is no vacuum. Things don't stay in place. There is no status quo. They either move in a more positive direction or they move in a more negative direction. And usually when the second thing happens, it happens fast. And this has to change. I mean, it's a good plan. It calls for Hamas to give up its weapons. And there is, I understand, an argument about what that means. Does that mean the rocket launchers, the drones, or also the M16s and the pistols? Okay, that's something to negotiate over. But Hamas disarms. Israel begins gradual withdrawal from the parts of Gaza that it still controls. An international military force comes in. Instead, Israel still keeps a buffer zone between Nachal Oz and the international force, and behind it, the areas of Gaza that will be controlled. This is a key by a new Palestinian government. that is supported by Egypt, supported by Saudi Arabia, supported by the UAE, is supported by the Palestinian Authority, and is not Hamas. And reconstruction begins in areas of Gaza where Israel gives the green light because the security situation is stable enough. All of that has to happen. The alternative to it is the current situation where 2 million people in Gaza are still under control of Hamas. They live in a smaller area, which actually means Hamas has more control over the people. All the aid that comes in through the UN, 600 trucks a day, Hamas steals the products and then sells them to the markets for double the price, and then uses the money to smuggle weapons and train 12-year-olds to become terrorists. What are we doing here? This is a repeat of October 6th. This is not what we should be doing. So if there's one thing that has to change so that we can keep the positive trajectory in Nahal Oz, we have to start implementing this plan that the president has spelled out for Gaza.
What incentive does Hamas have to implement the plan? The plan is really...
Right now, they have no incentive.
So how do you create the incentive to move forward? What's going to break the roadblock here?
One idea that was proposed, and I think it's a smart idea, is to start moving without them. Because in the areas that are not controlled by Hamas, you can begin reconstruction and you can hand over elements of running the daily life to this new Palestinian government. You can say, okay, here's an area that the IDF has cleared. It's right now under IDF control. We're willing to allow gradually population to move into this area from the more densely populated Hamas-controlled area, and we're handing you the control. And Hamas is not going to be present here, and if they try to get here, we kill them. But this has to start moving, and that increases the pressure on them. Also, the aid situation, you have to do whatever is possible to flood Gaza with food products. I know that sounds a bit contradictory, but what happens is when there is scarcity, so if there's nothing, then there's nothing. Okay, but then people starve and Israel gets blamed for it. We've been there. But if there is scarcity, that allows them to demand higher prices in the black market. If you flood it with food, then they cannot do this move and they don't raise money. You need to enlist the Egyptians to fight smuggling much more seriously. And Egypt is an important country and they can be an important ally, but they also have to get their act together. Smuggling from Egypt was a big problem before October 7, and it remains a problem today. And we can demand that they take tougher action on this. We can offer our help. We can work with them together. So these are complicated things to do, but they are better than the current situation in which we're basically doing nothing and Hamas is getting all the spoils.
I love what you're saying. And as you were talking, I was thinking about Winston Churchill. Because Churchill was known to be a very, very hard-nosed military person, but yes, at the same time, he was magnanimous in victory.
Yes.
And so if you see what the Allies did in Germany or Japan, they fought a vicious war. They flattened whole cities in Germany and in Japan in ways that the world, that Israel doesn't even approach in its response. But then they rebuilt those societies and were very aggressive in creating a new opportunity.
Indeed.
Are Israelis willing to do that? Are they willing to move past their rage at the Gazan people for October 7th and understand what you were saying, that there's a rational reason why we would do that? Are they willing to get past their rage at Mahmoud Abbas and actually think about what would be and the politics of it and actually do what you're saying. Because in a way, Israel, you could argue that yes, Hamas is going to continue to be belligerent and difficult, but is Israel really as desirous of this as you're suggesting?
I think it's the right move for Israel to go along with this Trump plan, to do so cautiously and not, rush into anything, but yes, to start implementing it and to implement it in a way that sidelines Hamas. I really believe it. Now, you mentioned Churchill, and often, his name is evoked in conversations about war here in Israel. Some politicians like to think that they are Churchill.
Yes.
One of the important things about Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt in World War II is that in order to defeat the evil of Nazi Germany and imperialist Japan, they were willing to cooperate with the very, very problematic regime of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine, Stalin and Churchill at the height of World War II saying, we're going to fight Germany and Japan until they surrender, but we're not going to cooperate with the Soviets. No, we're not going to cooperate with Stalin because he's just as bad as Hitler. So there's no way we're doing anything with the Soviets, right? Of course, that would have been a disastrous position that would have allowed the Nazis and the imperialist Japanese to, lose the war, but still have something for themselves afterwards. I mean, it would have been a totally different situation. The decision to see the Soviet regime, for all of its own atrocities and problematics, as an equal partner in the war against Nazi Germany and Japan was significant for victory. So, the idea that we're going to fight Hamas, but we're not going to cooperate with any Palestinian Arab alternative to Hamas is not a very Churchillesque idea. Okay? The idea that, Hamas is the enemy, but we are not willing to work with the Egyptians because, they're responsible for the smuggling. We're not going to work with Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. We're not going to work with the Saudis because MBS said that Israel committed genocide, which, by the way, he should not have said that. First of all, because it's not true. And also because if you want to be a serious leader on the world stage, don't say stupid things that are not true about other countries. But at the end of the day, we don't get to choose who are going to be the partners. We can only decide if we work with these people or if we want to do everything alone. And if we do everything alone, that means we're going to go to another war against Hamas. And Hamas will once again basically conceal themselves within the Palestinian population, the 2 million people of Gaza. And there will be civilian casualties, and there will be pressure on Israel, and we will not achieve the elimination of Hamas. And we will degrade our diplomatic standing, and we will hurt this Trump plan. And at the end of it, Hamas will rule the ruins like it is doing today. So let's take a moment to consider if there is a better option. Maybe there isn't. But if there is, we have to try it.
I don't mean to be a naysayer here, but with the elections coming and the rhetoric that is going to be heaped upon former Prime Minister Bennett for joining into a coalition with Arab partners, right?
Yes.
And this whole debate about who are you going to which
to sit within the government, yeah.
Right, which poison pill will you take? Will you take the poison pill of the Haredi, or will you take the poison pill of the Arab world, right? To make
or a poison pill of sitting with Netanyahu,
So okay, So help us in America, what knowing that you're not a prophet, there are no more prophets. But where do you see this election going, and who do you actually think today will be the next Prime Minister of Israel?
I hope it will be Naftali Bennett, because I think he was a wonderful Prime Minister in the short-lived but hope-producing government of change. As for a prediction, I think right now what we see is that the margin between the anti-Netanyahu bloc reaching a majority without the Arab parties and the anti-Netanyahu bloc not reaching a majority and relying on the Arab parties to then have a majority is not very large. It's a difference of 3 or 4 seats. Some polls, it's only 2 seats, some 5, but that's pretty much the range. That's about 100,000 people, 150. Those are shifts that can still happen. Number 2, the debate about the Arab parties, I think it's important to remember that the first politician in Israel, and I give him credit for that, who actually invited the party of Mansour Abbas, right, not to be confused with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, but Mansour Abbas, the Arab Israeli leader, who came out with this new political doctrine of no more staying in opposition and crying about Gaza, instead entering the coalition, no matter who is in power, and delivering for Arab Israeli citizens on education and transportation and healthcare and police and all of those things. The first politician to invite him to a coalition was Netanyahu, right before Bennett formed his government. And what happened at the time, Netanyahu wanted to form a government with Mansour Abbas. Some of his very racist partners on the far right vetoed the idea, and he did not have a majority without Mansour Abbas. And then Bennett used the opening that was created by Netanyahu to invite Mansour Abbas into an alternative coalition with him, and that's how he got the government of change. And I said at the time that if Mansour Abbas had joined Netanyahu's government, if those far-right elements had not vetoed the idea, I would have applauded both of them for doing something important for the state of Israel. And, I understand that it's a very complicated issue. I understand that after October 7, it is even more complicated than before. But I will quote something Mansour Abbas said, I think last week, which was a very interesting political observation. He was asked in an interview, what's your plan for after the election? Because all the parties of, all the center-right parties that are so important in this idea of an alternative coalition to Netanyahu, Bennett, Lieberman, Eisenkot, they're all saying that they don't want to rely on your support. So Mansour Abbas said, well, I actually prefer that the Zionist Jewish parties that oppose Netanyahu will have 61 seats, will have a majority of their own. That's what he said. He said, I prefer that Bennett and Lieberman and Eisenkot and Yair Golan will have 61 seats without me. And then I can join them without being the decisive factor. But, he added, if they don't have 61, what do you think? I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and allow Netanyahu and Ben Gvir to remain in power as an interim government forever? You seriously think that's what I'm going to do? Mm-hmm. No way I'm going to do that. And I thought that was a smart, nuanced, and realistic answer, because there are all kinds of parliamentary options that don't involve the creation of a government that still can be utilized under the right circumstances. And so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I think that was a smart answer by a smart politician.
He has been throughout and has said remarkable things that we never thought we would hear from a person in his position as well.
On October 8th, he called on Hamas to release all the hostages.
Yeah.
And he added that specifically taking civilians and within that group, women and children and elderly people is a crime also by the religious definitions of Islam.
Yeah.
That was a very important statement, and I will always remember that statement coming from him on October 8th.
It's interesting to me that you didn't focus on General Eisenkot. You talked about former Prime Minister Bennett. Where do you see him in this?
I think Gadi Eisenkot is going to be a very important person in the next government. And I understand there's this competition now between him and Bennett, who is going to be the prime minister, who is going to be the defense minister, who is going to lead, who is going to be right next to the. I think both of them are incredible, improvements over Netanyahu. That's just my view. I think there is an advantage to somebody who already has some experience in politics and has served one time as prime minister and served in several other ministerial roles and learned by his own mistakes, right? Because Bennett's previous government collapsed to some degree because he had unloyal people in his party. So that experience, that painful experience, is actually worth something when you try to make a political comeback. But these are two people that I personally appreciate, respect, and maybe they will at some point even join forces before the election. Who knows? But I see some advantage to having a politician with experience and someone who had already sat in that chair lead Israel through this very, very important transition, which will not be easy from the Netanyahu era. Assuming, of course, that this side actually wins the election, which is far from guaranteed. But assuming that happens, his prior experience will matter in this situation. And I'm not saying that in order to say anything bad about any of the other people, just to highlight one important quality.
No, I think what you're saying is really quite balanced and important. As we come to a close, I'm very nostalgic in a sense and moved because we've talked for a long time now. We've been in conversation, and I'm not sure, how things will go from here. But first of all, I want to express my deep appreciation for what you've given to Anshe Emet, and that you have made us smarter. You've helped us understand things more clearly. You have given a face to the Gaza envelope in ways that I'm not sure we would have had. We've created friendship with not only with me, but with our community, where people feel a real strength of relationship. So thank you for all of those things, and for all you've given us. It's most appreciated. I have one last question for you, though. But first, if you want to say something, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that it was very emotional for me that, when the synagogue staff reached out a few months ago and offered me to send a small video to this beautiful tribute that was done in your honor. And I felt it was important for me because this has really been a decade-long relationship by now. And an opportunity for me to inform and educate, but also and understand better through this communication about Jewish American life and specifically about the community in the city of Chicago, and the fact that I got to visit synagogue and meet people face to face. It's just been a wonderful connection, and I want to preserve it and keep it. It means a lot to me, and I'm grateful to you for making it happen and insisting to continue through the years. And it's been a wonderful journey.
Thank you. Do I get one last question?
Let's do it.
Okay. You wrote in The Gates of Gaza about the deep tensions and systematic failures that October 7th exposed. We are still at war. Democracy is still under a strain. Prime Minister has offered his own challenges, settler violence we've talked about, the country's closest ally publicly calling him crazy. Where do you think Israel's heading right now? And how do you gauge the mood of the country in this moment?
I hope it's heading in a better direction. I hope that by the end of this year, we will be able to say that we rose from this crisis and we emerged stronger from it. For all the terrible prices that we paid, for all the incredible people that we lost, we will see the communities on the Gaza border growing, expanding. We will see peace and quiet return to the communities of the north. We will see a real effort to repair the rifts inside Israeli society and the fractures with important constituencies outside of Israel, like we discussed before. And a focus on what makes Israel such a great country. You know, education and innovation and good health system and a diverse society, which, if we look at it in the right way, is a point of strength. It can also become a source of challenges, but it can be a point of great strength. This is how I see this country. And this is how I want to see its future as well. And I'm doing everything I can, and my family and many other good people, doing everything we can to make it happen.
Amen to that. Bezrat Hashem. May God also will this to happen. Thank you so very much, and we'll look forward to connecting in the future, Amir. Toda
All right, thank you so much, dear friend, and for this and for everything. And that's Lacha, I have to say, in your own new journey. And I hope we will keep walking together some of the distance.
Amen.
All right.